They blew firecrackers up a chief's nose and ears, dragged his body behind a slaughterhouse, then left him to rot next to butchered animals. Another chief was shot in the head, then stripped, decapitated, and his skull boiled for science. This wasn't war. It was a message. But what exactly happened to the native leaders who stood against U.S. expansion? Why did peace offers end with bullets and bayonets? In school, you've been told that the chiefs fell in war, but the truth is uglier, much uglier. This is the real story of how they died and what was done to them after. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Let's begin our countdown with a man who tried to unite the pieces, but got torn apart instead. Number 9. Tecumseh, Shawnee. He'd been trying to hold the line, pulling scattered nations together, tired tribes pushed to the edge. He stood between the old world and the one scrabbling in from the east. In the War of 1812, he sided with the British, not because he trusted them, but they were the only ones fighting the same enemy. October 1813, Ontario. The Battle of the Thames. His warriors stood their ground. The British didn't. They ran. They left Tecumseh behind, outnumbered, surrounded. The fighting didn't last long. Some say he was killed in the first rush. Some say he kept swinging till the line broke. But who killed him? That's still a question. Colonel Richard Johnson claimed it loudly, turned it into a campaign slogan later. But in the smoke and blood and chaos, no one really knew. Then there's what happened next. The Americans moved through the dead, looking for him. They found a body they said was Tecumseh. Couldn't be sure. Didn't matter. They took it apart anyway. They scalped it, cut the skin from his thighs, strips of him used for razor strops. An officer wrote that the body was skinned and mangled, not even recognizable. General Harrison saw it, said the same. Could have been anyone by then. But not everyone believed it was him. Some native accounts say his people slipped into the night and carried his real body away quietly, carefully, buried him proper. Supposedly, they also left another warrior behind, already dead. Let the soldiers think what they wanted. One man said the mutilated corpse had different teeth. Didn't match. Could be truth. Could be hope. Still, the Americans told it like they'd carved up Tecumseh himself. Some even bragged about it. They passed around pieces, called it revenge. Even some of their own were sickened. Letters spoke of it with shame, but others, they cheered. Johnson's supporters chanted it. Rumsey Dumpsey, Colonel Johnson killed Tecumseh. Got him elected vice president. And Tecumseh, his grave was never found. No one knows for sure. But the violence, what they did or said they did, this never left the story. He fought to stop the spread, to hold on to something older. In the end, the land ate up his trail. But the way he died, real or imagined, said everything about the war that took him. The next native chief on our list, however, didn't even get a chance to stand. Number 8, Black Kettle, Southern Cheyenne. Black Kettle wasn't a fighter by nature. He kept trying to make peace, even when the ground kept changing under his feet. Even after Sand Creek in 1864, where the soldiers came in swinging, killing so many, he held on. Shot, bleeding, but somehow made it out alive. After that, he still kept talking to the U.S. government, still kept hoping for something better. In 1867, he signed the Medicine Lodge Treaty, thought it might keep his people safe, thought maybe, just maybe, the talking would work. But the raids didn't stop. The fear didn't go away. The land stayed uneasy. Then came the winter of 1868. Custer rode out with the 7th Cavalry. The day was full of cold wind. Snow was still on the ground. He was looking for Cheyenne. He called hostile. He found Black Kettle's camp on the Washita River, said it was peaceful, but it didn't matter. It was still dark when the troopers came. Without talk or warning, Custer and his men spoke only one language: gunfire, steel, and screaming horses. Black Kettle and his wife, Medicine Woman later, tried to run. They rode hard through the freezing water, that river slicing through the cold. The chief had a U.S. flag flying over his lodge. But that didn't help. He'd spoken for peace, but it still didn't matter. Bullets cut them both down mid-crossing. Black Kettle's wife was hit again and again. She died there with him. Custer's men left his body in the river like it didn't matter. Someone found his body later, half in the water, shot up, hands still wrapped around the reins. He didn't let go. Custer's men then swarmed through the village, burned the teepees, took prisoners. It is said they killed 103 warriors. That number's probably high. A lot of them were women and kids. No scalping this time, no slicing ears, but it was still brutal. Some wounded got bayoneted where they lay. There were no lines between who could fight and who couldn't. Black Kettle died like he lived, caught between promises and betrayal. Just 4 years after Sand Creek, under another flag that didn't mean a damn thing. One soldier said he found babies in the snow afterward, not shot on purpose, just caught in the storm of it. Custer, however, didn't flinch. He wrote it up like a victory, said he crushed the band, leveled the village. He said it proud. Custer didn't stick around after that. By afternoon, more warriors, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, were closing in. So he pulled out fast and left the bodies behind. Later, Cheyenne scouts came back. They found Black Kettle and gave him a real burial, a quiet one. Their way? The white flag hadn't meant a thing. And people noticed, you know. Some called it a victory. General Sheridan backed it, said it was fair. But others, especially the Cheyenne, knew what it really was: murder. Black Kettle had done everything they asked. He signed papers, spoke soft, carried the flag Lincoln gave him, thinking it would keep the bullets away. But it didn't. He died because peace didn't stand a chance out there. The treaties were smoke. And while some natives gave up, others got harder, and the war kept going. As for Black Kettle, he became a symbol, not for how he fought, but for how he was hunted, shot down in the cold while trying to hold on to something that was already gone. And in the cold that followed, the wind carried more blood. Number 7, Sitting Bull, Hunkpapa Lakota. He was a holy man, a chief, Hunkpapa Lakota. By 1890, he wasn't free. He was under watch at Standing Rock, kept close, kept quiet. But that winter, something was stirring. The ghost dance was spreading. A hope, a prayer, a last grasp at something lost. And it scared the authorities. They thought Sitting Bull might light the match. So they came for him. Before dawn, December 15th, 43 Lakota policemen, native men like him, sent by the Indian Agency, backed by U.S. soldiers waiting nearby. They came to his cabin on the Grand River. They pulled him out of bed. He was 59. His people woke to the noise, came out, stood in the cold, watching. The chief wasn't going easy. He called out, told them to stand strong. Maybe he said, "I do not wish to go. Take courage." Maybe not. But the words were in the air. Then came the first shot. Catch the Bear raised his rifle and fired point blank at Bullhead, the lead policeman. He shot him in the side. Bullhead, dying, turned and fired into Sitting Bull's ribs. Then another shot rang out. Strike the Kettle hit another officer. The yard exploded. Red Tomahawk, another Lakota in uniform, raised his gun. He put a bullet through Sitting Bull's skull. And that was it. The chief fell, blood pouring from his head. He didn't speak again. The gunfire brought hell upon the camp. In minutes, 12 were dead, 6 of Sitting Bull's people, 6 of the police. One of them was Crowfoot, Sitting Bull's son, 14 years old. He shot arrows until they cut him down. When it was over, the chief lay still in the dirt, shot in the head, shot in the body. The blood soaked into the frozen ground. Then word spread fast. The Lakota were stunned. Grief turned to fear. Many ran south toward Pine Ridge, toward Bigfoot's camp, hoping to find safety. But safety wasn't waiting. Not that winter. They stripped Sitting Bull, right there in the dirt where he'd fallen. Some of the native police were bleeding, but it didn't matter. They tore off Sitting Bull's clothes. They said it was to keep any ceremony from happening. No time for dignity. They dragged his body to Fort Yates. Didn't even wait for the sun to rise. Without giving him any rites or songs, they just dumped him in a box and buried him quick in the post cemetery without markers or honors. Years later, in 1853, his relatives said they moved his bones, took him to Mobridge, South Dakota. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. Nobody really knows. There's doubt and not much else. What's clear is this: he was assassinated, not by strangers, not by soldiers, but by his own. Lakota men ordered to serve the same system that feared him, that feared a dance. That's the sick part. Just imagine yourself taken in your sleep, in front of your wives, your children, your people, and then killed over a prophecy and a prayer. They said it was just to prevent an uprising, but it was more than that. It was a message. They silenced a symbol. Later, an Army officer said it plain, called it the hardest blow that could be dealt to the natives, like killing a king, and he wasn't wrong. 2 weeks later, Wounded Knee happened, which we'll talk about momentarily. But for now, the Army wasn't done. Number 6, Bigfoot, Minneconjou Lakota. Minneconjou Lakota. Chief, folks knew him as Spotted Elk. Most called him Bigfoot. It was the winter of 1890, cold enough to bite through bone. Bigfoot was sick, pneumonia. He could barely sit up. He was laid out in a wagon, too weak to ride. Still, he led his people, about 350 of them, heading toward the Pine Ridge Agency, looking for safety, hoping to get away from the tension stirred up by the ghost dance movement. But they never made it. December 28th, the U.S. 7th Cavalry caught up with them near Wounded Knee Creek, surrounded them. Bigfoot, even in that state, raised a white flag. No fight in him. No fight in them. He'd always tried to talk first. The soldiers herded them into camp, held them there under guns. The snow was falling, everyone was cold, and there was no fire and no comfort. Then, next morning, Colonel Forsyth showed up with more men and more guns, with 4 Hotchkiss cannons pointing straight down at the camp from the hill. At sunrise, the cavalry began disarming the Lakota. It got tense, real fast. A young man, Black Coyote, was deaf. He didn't hear what was being yelled at him. He didn't let go of his rifle. Some say he didn't even know what was happening. There was a struggle. Then, a shot? No one knows who fired it. So the soldiers opened up. Bigfoot, sitting wrapped in a blanket, too sick to move, raised his hand. Maybe to say, stop, maybe just reflex. Either way, they shot him where he sat, multiple times. His blanket soaked through. The Hotchkiss guns lit up next. Those shells tore through the camp. Tents ripped open, people scattered, but there was nowhere to run. Some Lakota tried to fight back, grabbed whatever they could, a few rifles. But they were no match. Most never had a chance. The soldiers chased them, shot them in the snow. Women, children, anyone running. Later, General Nelson Miles, he saw the aftermath. He said it straight. Bigfoot and a crowd of women and children were hunted down, killed while fleeing. One man who made it out, Wasumaza. Black Elk's brother. He said the soldiers walked through the bodies after the shooting stopped, looked for anyone still breathing, shot them point blank. No mercy. After the gunfire faded, it was still echoing across the frozen plain. Then, silence took over. In less than an hour, it was done. Maybe 150 Lakota killed. Some say closer to 300. Bigfoot was gone. Most of his family, too. Wiped out. The cavalry lost 25 of their own. Probably shot each other in the chaos. When it ended, Bigfoot's body lay twisted in the snow. Shot up bad. Trampled by horses. His face barely looked human. They found him on his back, legs bent wrong, foam frozen around his mouth. Pneumonia and pain did that. The Army took a photo. It became famous now. Shows him lying there in the ice like a broken doll. That image would outlive them all. Nobody moved the bodies, not for days. A blizzard rolled in, covered the dead in snow. It wasn't until January 3rd that the burial crew came. They found them all frozen stiff, locked in the shapes they died in, arms bent, eyes still open. The soldiers dumped them in a pit on the hill. One mass grave, no prayers and no names. Just a hole in the ground. Some said Bigfoot died near the wagons, right where the flag of truce had been. That white cloth still flapped in the blood-stained snow. The Army called it a battle, gave out medals of honor, 19 of them. For what happened there. But there was no honor, just slaughter. Yet down south, another warrior had already met his end, and it wasn't clean. Number 5. Victorio Chihenne Apache. Victorio was a fighter, a guerrilla in the real sense. He was sharp, fast, always moving. He knew the land like he knew the back of his hand, and for a while that kept him and his people alive. By 1880, he'd been running for months. New Mexico, Texas. The desert kept him hidden, but food was low. Ammo, too. He had maybe 150 warriors with him, families in tow. They were tired, worn down. They made it as far as northern Mexico. There it was a dry and brutal rocky country, Tres Castillos. It was October, and Colonel Joaquin Terrazas was waiting with Mexican soldiers and Tarahumara scouts. They knew Victorio was coming, and they were ready. The fight broke out on the 14th. It was bad, real bad. Victorio's people were nearly out of bullets. Hay had no water. Some were fighting with bows. Others with knives. Close in, desperate stuff. No one agrees how Victorio died. One story says a Mexican rifleman shot him clean through the heart. Another says he used his own knife, chose death over capture. Could be either. Doesn't really matter. He died there on those rocks. After that, it turned into a massacre. Soldiers killed 78, men, women, even children. They took 68 captive. And then it got uglier. There was no mercy, not after years of Apache raids. Some captives were shot where they stood. The rest, they didn't stand a chance. One of the scouts, Tarahumara, found Victorio's body. He scalped him. That was proof. And Victorio's long hair made it clear. The bounty was 2,000 pesos. Big money back then. He then brought the scalp in and got paid. And that was the end of Victorio. Some say they took his skull, too. No one's sure. The scalp was enough, though. That's what the officials wanted, a clean sign of victory. Colonel Terrazas took the remaining captured women and kids back to Chihuahua. Crowds lined the streets. They cheered. Maybe they thought it was over. Maybe they just wanted blood. But the end for those captives wasn't freedom. Most were sold off, into slavery, into servitude, strangers in a strange place, no way back. Nana, Victorio's old ally, wasn't there at Tres Castillos. He heard what happened, and he didn't forget. Later, he caught some Mexican soldiers, even Juan Mata Ortiz, one of the officers who'd helped hunt Victorio down. Nana burned him alive. That was the reply. Still, losing Victorio cut deep. It broke something in the Apache resistance. His scalp was paraded, shown off, like a trophy, like a prize. One officer even bragged in a letter, "Dead, scalp secured." That's all he said. As for the violence, it went on in what they did to his body. For the Apache, that kind of thing, mutilating the dead, wasn't tradition. Not before the white men came. Victorio had once led raid after raid, slipping through canyons like smoke, but he died in a dry land not his own, cut down and carved up like a hunted animal. And yet, further north, another chief was already being hunted. Number 4, Little Crow, Dakota Sioux. He was once a war chief of the Mdewakanton, Dakota, led his people through the Dakota War of 1862, Minnesota soil soaked in blood back then. But the uprising didn't last. The army crushed it fast. Little Crow fled after that, went quiet, disappeared into the land. A year passed. In the summer of 1863, he snuck back into Minnesota with his teenage son, Wawinapa. He stayed low, no grand return, just a father and son out in a field, picking berries. Near Hutchinson, they crossed paths with a settler named Nathan Lamson. His boy, Chauncey, was with him. Somehow, guns came up, nobody blinked. Then, all of a sudden, shots cracked. Little Crow fired first. Missed. Chauncey didn't. Hit the chief in the chest. He dropped. Wawinapa ran to him, held him, stayed close. Hours passed. The boy brought water from the creek, sat there, watching the light leave his father's eyes. Nathan Lamson stayed hidden, watching them. Before dawn, Little Crow was gone, dead in a field with his son beside him. Lamson and his boy didn't even know who they'd killed, not at first, but when they found out, they took his scalp, dragged the body into town. The next day was the 4th of July, a celebration. And wait till you hear what they did to the dead chief. But before we tell you what they did to the dead chief, quick note. If you're into frontier survival stories, real survival tips, and more like this, check out our channel. Also, we just dropped an episode on the most fearsome native tribes from back in the day, so be sure to check it out when you have the time. All right, now back to that 4th of July. The chief's body was still warm, but the crowd, they were just getting started. They lit firecrackers and stuffed them into his nose and ears. Then they blew them. Yeah, they did. Then they tossed his body in a pit behind a slaughterhouse. They didn't even cover it. They just dumped him there, half buried in animal waste and gravel. And that's how they treated a chief. In the days after, people came to that pit, took what they wanted, pieces of Little Crow's body, gone, collected like trinkets, like souvenirs. His scalp was sent off to the Minnesota Historical Society. That was official. The state gave Nathan Lamson $500 for killing him, gave Chauncey $75 for the scalp. Then in August, the army came back, dug him up to make sure it was really him. What was left got passed along, his skull, his scalp, his bones, all boxed up and cataloged like museum pieces. By 1879, the skull and scalp were on public display at the state capitol, just sitting there. A chief, once proud, now turned into a warning behind glass. They took it down in 1915, only because his family begged, but the bones stayed locked away for decades. Not until 1971 did his grandson get them back, and finally, he got to bury him, quietly, properly. But by then, it had been over 100 years. Little Crow died picking berries with his son, got shot, scalped, blown up with firecrackers, then put on display like a specimen. Even some people back then were shaken by it, but the papers just printed it straight. Scalp delivered, bounty paid. No shame, no question. Next in our list, however, came the one who killed a general and lost his head for it. Number 3, Captain Jack Modoc. They called him Kinpuwash, but the soldiers, the papers, they knew him as Captain Jack. He was Modoc, lived in the high desert lands where California touches Oregon. That was his home, and he wasn't about to leave it easy. In 1872, things broke bad. The Modoc War started. Just a handful of warriors, maybe 50 or so, dug in at the lava beds consisting of twisted rock, cold winds, nothing soft about it. But they knew that land like blood knows the vein. And for months they held off hundreds of U.S. soldiers. They just kept holding on. Then came the meeting, April 11th, 1873. Peace talks. General Canby sat across from him. Words were supposed to be exchanged, but Jack had pressure on his back, his own people, fed up, gossiping that peace was weakness. That day, Jack pulled a gun and shot Canby dead. The only general ever killed in the Indian Wars. And that was it. After that, the army came down hard. Reinforcements, more guns, more hunger. The Modocs started turning on each other. By June, it was over. Jack got caught. They didn't waste time. A quick court-martial. They called it justice. Said it was murder. Jack and 3 others were sentenced to hang. Then, October 3rd, 1873, Fort Klamath. It was a cold, gray day. Soldiers stood in rows. Settlers brought their kids. Even some Modocs came to watch. Jack stood on the scaffold, quiet. Didn't plead, didn't cry. He simply waited, but they dropped him. Then came the real ugliness. Army doctors stepped in, said it was for science. They took Jack's head, took the others too. 4 heads, clean cuts. Then they sent them off to Washington, Army Medical Museum. They wanted to study the shape of his skull. Thought it could explain something. They buried what was left of him at Fort Klamath, without a ceremony, just a shallow grave. His head had been taken, preserved, pickled, then boxed up like some kind of prize. In 1874, his skull went on display. Rows of bones behind glass. A newspaper called it low-browed, fierce-looking. That's how they wrote about him, like he wasn't a man, just a thing to stare at. In 1898, the Smithsonian took it, locked it away in a drawer. And for 100 years, his skull sat in the dark, tagged and numbered. One of hundreds, all native, all dead, all taken. That's how they saw him, not as a chief, not as a father or husband, but as another lowly specimen. The rest of the Modocs paid too. Only 153 of them left after the war. The government packed them off to native territory. Oklahoma, Jack's wife, his kids, gone too. No return. But it's what they did to Jack that sticks. They killed him like a criminal, then cut him up like an artifact. That kind of thing wasn't rare. Army surgeons were told to collect native skeletons. And they did. No shame, just orders. The Seattle Weekly Intelligencer in 1875 said the whole thing was ghoulish. They called for decency, but it fell on deaf ears. Nothing changed. Jack had stood his ground, and for that they made sure he'd never rest. But that's not all. Next on our list came another peace man, and they tore him apart too. Number 2, White Antelope, Southern Cheyenne. He was truly a peace man, the kind who believed words could still mean something. Back in November 1864, he was camped with his people near Sand Creek, southeastern Colorado. They thought they were safe. Black Kettle had raised 2 flags over his lodge, an American flag and a white one. It was a sign to say, "We don't want to fight." White Antelope believed in that, believed maybe the Army would honor it. But just before dawn, November 29th, it came. 700 men on horseback, Colorado volunteers, led by Colonel John Chivington. They rode in fast and hard without warning. The village was full of families, old folks, women, kids. Most didn't even have weapons. White Antelope, he was about 75 by then, ran toward the soldiers, not away. Maybe he still thought he could stop it. Maybe he wanted to die standing. When he saw it was no use, he stopped. He straightened his back, folded his arms. Then he started to sing. Nothing lives long, only the earth and mountains. That's what they say he sang right before they shot him in the chest. But death wasn't the end of it. After killing over 150 people, Chivington's men didn't stop. They cut up the bodies. They took scalps. They took parts. White Antelope's body, they didn't leave it alone either. Soldiers sliced off his nose, his ears, his genitals. One man cut off his scrotum and turned it into a tobacco pouch. And these weren't rumors. Army men saw it. After they stripped him, they took his buckskin shirt. They took the blanket off his back. They called it spoils. They did the same to others, men, women, kids. No one was spared. The soldiers kept cutting flesh. They kept all the pieces. Later, they showed them off, took them to Denver, paraded them through town like trophies, held them up in a theater, women's scalps, children's scalps. Even the private parts of girls stretched over saddle bows. They called it victory. And, as you'd expect, the word spread. It didn't sit quiet. Captain Silas Soule, an officer who refused to join the slaughter, wrote about it after. Said he saw babies, 2-3 months old, scalped. Said he saw all kinds of scalps. Said White Antelope's body was torn apart. Nose, ears, testicles, gone. A year later, Congress held hearings. They read it into the record. One congressman said soldiers made tobacco pouches from the scrotums of the dead. For the Cheyenne, it was more than loss. It was betrayal. White Antelope had trusted the white flag, trusted their word, and he died for that. One survivor said it plain: they murdered the chiefs who had trusted them, then mutilated their bodies in ways that made them sick. And what they did to White Antelope? They did again, but worse. Number 1, Mangas coloradas, Chiricahua Apache. Mangas coloradas. Big name, bigger presence. He was nearly 70. He rode in under a white flag to Fort McLean. He said he'd talk. He thought maybe the killing could end. He believed their word, maybe just wanted to believe it, like every other native chief across the continent. And they told him he'd be safe, that it was a meeting. Nothing more. He was worn thin by then. Old bones, old wounds. Too many years spilling into each other. First fighting the Mexicans, then the Americans. It never stopped. But in the winter of 1863, something in him gave. He said he wanted peace. But the moment he got there, they grabbed him. They tied him up like some wild thing. Brigadier General West didn't want him alive by sunrise. That was the order. So they dragged him into a guardhouse, tossed him in like he was nothing. They bound him tight. That let the cold settle in. Then the real cruelty began. They stuck bayonets in the fire, waited till they glowed, then pressed them into his flesh, legs, feet. They burned him slow. Yet he didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just looked at them and said, "I am not a child to be played with." That line sat heavy in the room, made their hands twitch. So they shot him, point blank. And then, just to be sure, a sergeant walked up close. He put a pistol to Mangus's head, pulled the trigger. Yeah, it happened like this. Come morning, West lied. He said Mangus tried to run, that they shot him during an escape. He even said they kept their word. But they didn't. They shot him in cold blood, at close range, while he was tied up. Then they dragged his body out. They didn't even try to hide what they'd done. Then they dug a hole, shallow. It was barely a grave. The next day, a doctor came by. He dug him up again. He cut off his head, boiled it to strip the flesh. He wanted the skull. For science, he said. Some say it went to the Smithsonian. Maybe. Nobody really knows. One of the soldiers took his scalp. Another dumped what was left in a dry creek bed and left him out there like garbage. As mentioned before, to the Apache, that's worse than killing a man. That's killing his spirit too. They believe the soul can't move on if the body's desecrated. And Mangus was a chief, a leader, and he'd come to talk peace. And when word got back, it lit a fire. Cochise, his son-in-law, swore revenge. So did Geronimo. They called it the worst kind of wrong. They said it would be paid for. And it was. What followed wasn't just war. It was personal, blood for blood. Not long after, Apache warriors took a U.S. officer's head in battle, and the blood didn't stop for 25 years. But you know, it didn't end with Mangus. It never does. They called it progress. But look close at the flags ignored, the treaties burned, the bodies left in the snow. These chiefs were silenced, dismantled, displayed. So the real question isn't how they died. It's why we were never meant to remember.